Hello, welcome to the Forge and Anvil podcast. Something is going on at the FBI, and today we are going to discuss that. This is the Forge and Anvil podcast where we embrace uncomfortable conversations about culture and politics to sharpen ourselves for the race set before us. My name is Connor Buckingham, and I host this podcast. Joining me today is my co host, Zach Aval. Zach, say hello.
Hello!
Alrighty, and then as you can see, our regular co-host Michael Aper is not able to be with us this week. We are sad to be without him, but we will do our best to be entertaining regardless. So we're going to go ahead and cover a major news story going on in the news cycles, as we say on the interwebs, or whatever Zach says, intergoogles.
Interhighways, I use like 9.
There we go.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so this is from the New York Post. So, New York Post reports that an FBI hero, FBI hero paying the price for exposing unjust persecution of conservative Americans. So, this is directly from the New York Post. Bombshell allegations by FBI Special Agent Steve Friend contained in a whistleblower complaint filed late Wednesday with the Department of Justice Inspector General revealed a politicized Washington, D.C. FBI field office cooking the books to exaggerate the threat of domestic terrorism and using an overzealous January 6th investigation to harass conservative Americans and violate their constitutional rights. Friend, 37, a respected 12-year veteran of the FBI and a SWAT team member, was suspended Monday, stripped of his gun and badge, and escorted out of the FBI field office in Daytona Beach, Florida, after complaining to his supervisors about the violations. The article goes on to say he says he was removed from active investigations into child sexual exploitation and human trafficking to work on J6 cases sent from DC. He was told domestic terrorism was a higher priority than child pornography. And as a result, he believes his exploitation investigations were harmed. Your thoughts, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, it's domestic terrorism. Like, I guess I'm concerned about it, especially just as like time goes on. Like, remember when we were in college, like the first time there was mass protests over police violence and how that got kind of scary, and that was like 2 days. And then like since then, it seems to have only gotten worse with like the rise of Antifa and then the Proud Boys, and then kind of like a big turning point where I think everybody had kind of their eyes open was with Charlottesville, where like there are lots of people that are upset about things, and there's lots of people that just like causing chaos there.
Yeah.
Um, so I think something like that, we all got a rude awakening there. And so now every time there's any type of protest, what happens, it's almost like there's some sort of weird formula to it. Like you like people show up and they do their regular protesting. Maybe there's some shouting, there's signs and things like that. And people are arguing with each other. And then the sun sets, and then rocks start going through buildings, and garbage cans are lit on fire. And there's all sorts of stuff that I'm not going to go too far into because that gets into kind of conspiracy territory. But there's questions as to how organized some of these groups are, and like
Mm-hmm.
how deep their backing is, and how deep their pocketbooks are. So that's concerning. And so I think, when you fast forward to the events of January 6th, there's a lot of those same questions. And it's like Charlottesville, but almost worse in a way. I don't like what Charlottesville meant for like the conversation around race in our country, but like the very fabric of American democracy, even the romantic version of it that we all learn in school, uh, was seriously challenged in a way that was like probably not certainly not appropriate, and I think spooked a lot of people. And so it's not a surprise that the FBI investigated some of these. And it's also not a surprise, if you know anything about the history of the FBI, that maybe it wasn't all on the up and up. Um, as far as like, I mean, it's hard for me to, I had to read that article several times, to be honest with you today, just because there's something that triggers like a skeptical response in me when people try to play that victim card. And I think for a long time now, there has been this persecution complex kind of arising in the right. And like, so I think it's gotten to the point where it took a minute for me to realize, like, no, there's actually something a little bit
Mm,
more to it than just people complaining about or claiming
mm,
persecution when really people are just
right.
giving them a hard time. Like, there's a big difference between, people just making fun of you because you have certain beliefs to, the FBI like knocking on your door or searching through your private browsing history and things like that, or your mail. It's a big, big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I definitely think that the persecution complex was a real thing for sure. I think what's hard is like now, I kind of like what you're saying is it does seem like there's a lot more validity behind those claims. Whereas I think the main reason, and this is just my take on it, I think the main reason why the right tends to have had a persecution complex was because I think the right lost the culture war a while back.
Mhm.
And in terms of like what they call like the mountains of civilization being taken over, I think for the most part, major media, major entertainment, major political movements, a lot of just the narrative setting things for our country, a lot of what sets our history, what sets our trends, what sets our culture, were
Mhm.
taken over by the left wing. And a lot of that started in the 60s. And to be honest, it's because, let's face it, there was a lot of actually good artistry in the 60s, as you and I have discussed at length many times.
Yeah.
But a lot of those artists were left leaning,
Mhm.
some more radical than others, obviously, but that's to be normal. That's just humanity.
Mhm.
Um, but I think now what's happening is I from my perspective, it seems as though everything has accelerated a lot recently, and I don't know, exactly what all the reasons are behind that. There's so many multifaceted,
Yeah.
reasons to give, but either way, it has greatly accelerated. Um, what I find really interesting and disturbing is the idea that um, there are now multiple FBI whistleblowers that have been coming out, just all within the last couple weeks. Maybe it's been a little longer than that for some, but I've noticed it only in the last like week or so that there's been multiple major whistleblowers.
Mhm.
And this one, of course, he was immediately put on leave and removed from the FBI, essentially.
Mhm.
But what bothers me is his accusation that the FBI essentially told him to uh, stop prioritizing child exploitation cases in order to focus on finding domestic extremism. And what I think is hard is that term has become so vague and intentionally broad
Right.
that the left side of the aisle does call the whole right side of the aisle extremists, and
Mhm.
that's always where the narrative does shift to, is the right side is extremists. So then you hear about um, this FBI agent essentially being told to ignore child exploitation to focus on domestic extremists, which the definition by the left sometimes, if there is legitimate extremism, they are overshadowing it by calling believing in traditional marriage extreme, for example, because everyone 5-10 years ago believed in you know most forms of traditional marriage, at least in terms of the majority of the country and the majority of the culture. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that when you hear the exploitation of children is being uh, is being removed, in priority of going after domestic extremism?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there with that as well. Like, I agree with what you're saying. Like, it is kind of vague. Um, because yeah, I don't know it's to the point that I don't know what is considered domestic terrorism. Like, like people going kind of nuts and throwing rocks through windows and lighting trash cans on fire, basically those riots. I'm not sure that I would call that terror, because there's usually a purpose to terrorism. I think those people kind of, a lot of them, some of them got caught up in the moment. Some of them were definitely bad people just looking for an excuse.
Hmm.
But that's not terrorism. That's, like the people
Yeah.
that were, like, and so, I mean, and I did want to push back a little bit on um, some of the statements there about, everybody on the left side of the aisle painting everybody on the right extremists. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think some of the more vocal people, and by extension, some of the more notable people on the left, let's say, certainly will make that claim. But I think if even if you poke at some of like the Twitter warriors and stuff like that, they would have to admit either that or they're not being honest with themselves, and that's a big problem, that it's not all conservatives or everybody on the right that's in extreme, because there are people that had legitimate questions about the 2020 election
Hmm.
that some of them aren't even remotely conservative, right?
Right.
There's just, like, I for a long time I had questions about it until about last summer when everything kind of came to light. But like, I don't consider myself a terrorist or an extreme. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I'm not. Well, the FBI is probably watching me, but like it's strange. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I mean, yeah, I would definitely like pause pause before I would say like everybody thinks this about conservatives, or everybody thinks this about liberals. It's far
For
more.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And of course, I am painting with a wide brush, just to, kind of quickly throw out the argument, but there's definitely nuance there. And I think that's what the issue is. What what I actually see as the issue, to get a little more specific, is
Okay.
I think that there is a group on the left that is very vocal, but also has a lot of control over the left wing party that is throwing out most of the accusations.
Mhm.
Because, for example, some of the other people that have been called extremists are people that would consider themselves to be socially left wing, but are just no longer okay with basically the current Democratic Party, like Jimmy Dore, for example. He's someone that I've been listening to more lately just to always make sure that I'm not like in an echo chamber. And what's
Sure.
unfortunate is there are people that are on the left side of the aisle, and this is where, for conservative talking points, they're usually referred to as leftists as opposed to just Democrats or liberals. Usually the leftists are the more militant group that has a lot of control, that really has the majority sway over the party, and they are the most vocal, and they are the ones that send out the accusations. But uh, they would consider me to be in an echo chamber for listening to Jimmy Dore. And I'm sure that if I would ever talk to someone like Jimmy Dore, I would come up with a ton of policy disagreements that we have.
Mhm.
But what I have noticed with Jimmy Dore is that he just tries to follow the facts. He might
Mhm.
have different conclusions than me, but he tries to follow the facts, and for that he is demonized. But he is someone that is traditionally left wing, and
Mhm.
so for that same reason, I think it's mostly concerning, because I think that the vast population would fall under the category of being um, an extremist if the idea of extremism is just having questions. And that's something that is completely un-American, as you know, because you would consider yourself socially to be on the left.
Mhm.
And I would say a healthy left wing is a group of people that ask questions of authority.
Mhm.
And nowadays, the militant part of the left wing does not want you to ask questions, because they are currently in control, and they kind of just want to do what they want to do, and they want to cram their policies down your throat, and they don't want you to speak out against it. So that's where I get concerned about this weaponizing of the FBI, because there are multiple whistleblowers, aside from the one that we read about, that have come forward saying that the FBI is essentially being weaponized on behalf of the Democratic Party.
I mean,
Um,
yeah,
Go ahead.
don't that's anything new, because I think about how the FBI was spying on the Catholic Church when JFK was running for president, and that in that case, that was, the conservatives doing that. So I mean, something I've been concerned about is just the FBI and organizations like that being used as political tools there.
Yeah.
And something that I mean, I don't think has ever been like it's always been something that's always been in the background that I've thought about, but it's never been up until, January 6th, or even just going back further, right, to that whole, like, the whole Russiagate
Hmm.
controversy, which ended up not being there was really nothing there, right? Some
Right.
interesting stuff, but nothing that you could, um, impeach a president over,
Right.
or, have to do revote or something like that, have to do a re-election.
Right.
Uh, but, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about. Like, I am concerned about it, and I think one of the other whistleblowers, I didn't get a chance to look too far into this. One of them, that was one of the whole reasons why he came forward, was he felt that specifically in regards to the aftermath of January 6th,
Right.
uh, the FBI had been far too political. But I mean,
Right.
yeah, to the point of some of these the uber leftists that have sway. Um, I wonder how much of a voice they actually have, even within their own party. Because if it's as extreme as we're trying to talk about it being, I have to wonder why they're not more successful.
Mm.
Um, you know what I mean? Because Joe Biden is far from somebody I would even consider radically left. He's certainly more to the left than most people, most Republicans, but uh, I don't think he's that far left compared to other Democrats. I
Mm.
think people get there. I think being one of the things I read somewhere is that being what was the word that was used? Being provocative, let's say, is kind of what's in vogue right now, is just saying things for the intention of it. So saying things like all men are rapists, right? Factually not correct, but it gets you attention, right?
Mhm.
I'm not so sure it's healthy attention, but I think one of the reasons why, to your point about the right losing the culture war, I think the reason why they lost is because liberals just told a better story, right?
Yeah.
Some good, some bad. Things like like some of the bad stuff would be things like super high minimum wages, um, a universal basic income, all the free stuff, basically free colleges and things like that. Things that have pretty severe medium to long term consequences. Um, but when you're just graduating high school and you see how expensive college is, somebody offering it to you for free starts to sound pretty attractive really fast.
Right.
Uh, they just told a better story.
Right.
Both,
Yeah.
the goods, their lies were better and their truths were.
Yeah. I agree with that, and that's where I would kind of bring the church in a little bit to say that I think that the church as an institution is very conservative. And before someone misunderstands what I mean,
Mhm.
I don't mean they are Republican. I mean they are conservative in the sense that they tend to try to conserve traditional values. That means things like having a strong family unit, believing that there's a power higher than you and you are not, there is a God in heaven and you are not him.
Mhm.
um, just some of those basic understandings of even just purity. And obviously there are churches that took the purity movement to unhealthy lengths, which we can definitely talk about in a future episode. That's a whole other topic.
I watched a good.
But my point is that's what I mean when I say the church is conservative. Now that being said, I completely agree with you that I think the left told a better story, and I think they've been telling a better story for many decades, which is why they've gained so much ground. Um, I personally think that's beginning to change, but I think a lot of that was caused by I think the church abandoned culture.
Mm,
Um, maybe not entirely. Obviously, there are definitely the examples of people that were within culture, but I do think that church, by and large, I think there was a lot of shame, maybe not shame, but there was a lot of discouragement of being too obsessed with culture, because it was the idea of like, we need to kind of be separate from the world because we are the church, and we need to hold ourselves to a different standard. But in doing that, we abandoned a lot of culture, which is a mistake, because the reality is we believe that we have the spirit of the creator inside of us. So we should honestly be some of the best creators. And when you look at some of like the old art from, many generations past, most of the greatest works of art were from believers, and I believe a lot of that was divinely inspired. But I do think the American church, for a while there, really gave up a lot of the culture. And there, again, multifaceted. We won't be able to even scratch the surface as to why so many of these things came about. But either way, I think where that leaves us now is that we are um, no longer in control of many of the institutions. And by control, I don't mean in a negative connotation. I mean, someone has to be in charge. The reality is, hierarchy is something that can't really be avoided um, in human nature. It can be mitigated, but not avoided. But all that to say, we now have to look at the fact that we are staring down a politicized a lot of people have been using the term regime. I don't know if I would call it that, but there is at least a force that is being politicized, that is in charge of most of the major institutions. And there are multiple FBI whistleblowers coming out and saying, this is happening, it is real, and they are losing their positions for it. And so it's not like this is illegitimate when you see these FBI agents literally walking away from lifelong career. This guy that we read about was a 12-year veteran of the FBI. It should be cause for concern for all people. And the reason why I even brought it up as a conversation for this podcast episode is the fact that you acknowledged a moment ago that you had questions about the 2020 election. Well, you're not supposed to. So, folks, Zach is someone who would be considered to be left-wing by his own omission, in terms of his social beliefs. Well, Zach is the type of person that would be a target for this. So it's one of those things where it's the slippery slope that you do have to watch out for, because a politicized any institution that's been politicized against general people that just want to be free thinkers, that have questions about things, that's a horrible thing that we have to nip in the bud, or else we're going to be going down a really, really bad road.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a target for different reasons, because I happen to think all elections are fraud. So I mean, I got to make the same argument 2 election cycles in a row, but for various different reasons.
Yeah.
So I mean, but that gets into the whole anarchy conversation, which we won't have. But yeah, no, I mean, it's weird to think about, just like, I mean, and even some of the questions like that I had, they all had answers, and they were all, the further I dug, like the more, like for example, like some of the voting machines went down. I think it was in Illinois, because there was some sort of weird like plumbing leak, and so they had to.
That was in Georgia.
Georgia, right? And
one of
so
the swing states.
Yeah, so right, so it's an important state in the election, but like the more I dug into it, it actually ended up being like even sillier. Like somebody like they don't like clog a toilet. That's kind of what I was hoping to find out, that somebody just like took a massive dump, but no, a pipe like
It was
actually.
something like that, though. It was like a leaky pipe. They made it sound like it was this main water
That's
main that broke and was
what.
causing this massive flooding, and it was like a leaky faucet, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, it was enough to do damage, but like, but like, and no votes were miscounted there at that particular polling station. You know what I mean? So even though it was weird, and like of all days to have this plumbing issue, right? But still, again, it's something that just on its face value, if you read the article, just a headline, right? That's suspicious as heck, and your
Right.
guard goes up. But then you know, it's unfortunate that I had to go through so much effort to find, you know, something I
Right.
really found that interesting. But it just
Yeah.
goes to show that, you know, something that small in one particular area can snowball.
Right. Well, it definitely raises questions, and then that's where the issue is. It's like if we're not allowed to ask questions anymore because we're, a lot of the, I think a lot of the raids that the FBI is currently conducting, whether that be on Trump's home or whether that be on, if you didn't see this morning, actually it wasn't this morning, it was over the weekend.
Mhm,
The FBI did raid a home of a pro-life advocate,
mhm,
and essentially the I'll link this story because I don't want to read from all of it and take a
mhm,
bunch of time. But the gist of the story is that he he was essentially praying outside of a Planned Parenthood, and um, the story goes, at least from the defendants in this scenario,
mhm,
that the father was outside praying, and a pro-abortion activist was coming out and being really aggressive towards his son. And I
mhm,
guess the dad essentially pushed the pro-abortion activists, and the pro-activists, I believe, tried suing him. Was the story,
mhm,
but the court dismissed it. Apparently, it was all on video. Again, I haven't gone through all the details. I will leave that for the viewers to decide.
mhm,
But to get to my point, the FBI raided this man's home and arrested him
mhm,
because of that incident that a lower court threw out.
mhm,
So it was essentially, the court did not make the decision that the federal government wanted. So they are overriding the state court and coming in and arresting this man. And in this FBI raid, they said there was like 15 to 20 cars pulling up to this FBI, to
mhm,
this man's house of FBI agents. And they came out and essentially had guns pointed at this family. And he has a bunch of kids that were screaming and crying while this was happening. And this man was taken away.
mhm,
Um, and all that to say, I think a lot of these stories are coming out as an intimidation tactic, kind of like you mentioned in the previous episode when we talked about the IRS.
mhm,
I believe a lot of this is an intimidation tactic, and I think it's mostly meant so that we can't have these open discussions about things like elections and whether or not we think they're legitimate, or any number of questions that we may have. And I think that's really unfortunate, and that's where I think as the church we should speak up against this, not because we have all the answers figured out, but
mhm,
because we need to be allowed to ask questions. Because if we lose our ability to dialogue with one another, that's
mhm,
only going to further increase polarization.
mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So, yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things that abortion clinics and churches have in common is they get a lot of bomb threats. So, under semi-normal circumstances, you can almost kind of see the FBI at least like going, "Hey, what's going on over there?" Because like there has been documented instances of pro-life, ironically pro-life people.
Mhm.
Um, Doing sinister things at abortion clinics and things like that. And you know, it's much the same with the pro-choice people as well. But if you know the guy got arrested, right? First of all, I'm assuming because how else would this be up on the FBI's radar? And the lower court threw it out. It doesn't. It seems wildly out of their jurisdiction, especially if it's
Right.
this dude's first. It'd be one thing if this dude was making fights out of at every
Right.
Planned Parenthood in you know the state, whatever state he was in. Be one thing, you know, or if he had graffitied a Planned Parenthood or made active threats against employees, you know what I mean? Things like that, where
Right.
like at that point, you know, at least this is how it works in the TV shows, is the FBI and the police are kind of working together on that kind of a thing. But for the FBI to pull the trigger on an operation like that, it's like the swatting thing. I don't know if you remember that, but people live stream video game live streamers on YouTube and
Mhm.
Twitch and stuff like that, it's still going on. But people would call in fake, you know, bomb threats or say this
Right.
guy's got child pornography or something like that, and then the police come in. It's like that, but on a little larger scale, right? Just because it's the
Absolutely.
FBI. Like it's one thing if your local jurisdiction, municipality, and their SWAT team is coming. It's another thing when it's like the feds. So everybody's tax dollars are paying for the tanks and the cop cars and to come in and smash your door down.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's where I guess I would to go back to the main point I'm trying to make with this entire segment.
Mhm.
The reason why I think we need to be vocal against this stuff is because I think it's also easy to forget to the average person who's not really wanting to be very politically up to date. Because let's face it, politics can be a drag. It is for me, and even enjoy talking civics and politics, but I still get bogged down by it.
Mhm.
But for the average person, they don't want to think about it, but you are paying for that. You are paying for the FBI to be politicized. So if you are someone that, as you mentioned, Zach, it's not always a left versus right issue. I completely agree with that, which is why I tried to make the distinction earlier between some left wingers that are asking questions that are being labeled as right wing or extremist, basically only for the reason of they're asking questions. They're not just accepting a narrative.
Mhm.
Um, but it really ends up being people who want to ask questions, who want to explore, who want to say, hey, wait a minute, can you explain this to me? Those are
Mhm.
the people that are going to be uh, under threat, essentially, for a politicized any form of government, really. So that's where I think we need to speak out against this, because whether you are a left-leaning individual, right-leaning individual, whatever that means to you, um, if you want to have the ability to have free and open discussions, we have to defend our ability to do so, which means we have to speak out against any agency that is being politicized, whether that be on the right wing or the left wing. So
Mhm.
that is the main point that I'm trying to make in all of this.
Mhm.
Um, because to also respond to your point about the bomb threats,
Mhm.
there currently have been successful threats that have been carried out to pregnancy clinics. So these are people that would be considered pro life, essentially, that are just offering services to pregnant women, such
Mhm.
as um, testing, as well as medical advice, even getting connected with adoption agency, things like that. They're just additional choices outside of abortion.
Mhm.
There is a group going around called Jane's Revenge that they've
Mhm.
been in the news quite a bit lately, that have actually conducted several of these. There's actually been some. Um, I don't want to. I don't want to say. I don't have it in front of me. I was looking for it a moment ago, um, just in case I'm wrong. But there there have been smashed windows. There have been vandalism, and I believe there's been a couple of bomb threats, possibly even one or two carried out, and some like torching of buildings.
Mhm.
And obviously, that's uncalled for. And anyone on right or left should say that's not okay, whether you are for abortion or against it.
Mhm.
But that's where the concern comes in, is that that's being ignored by the FBI, but as well as child exploitation cases,
Right.
but going after domestic terrorism that these FBI whistleblowers have said are just considered conservative
Yeah.
individuals.
Mhm.
That's where it's really concerning, because they are attacking an ideology, not a
Mhm.
crime, which means that justice is not being blind in this scenario, and
Correct.
that should be scary for everyone, whether the gun's pointed at you right now or not. It could be in the future, as many libertarians have been
Yeah.
telling all of us for years.
Think we would have learned like the last 20 years, like you can't wage a war on an idea. Like terrorism is an ideological thing,
Right,
right? So what does that mean to declare war on terrorism? Like who are the
right,
terrorists? Like what exactly have they done? Again, that's where my questions are. Is like it'd be one thing if these people were like, I would even almost let it slide. I'd still look at this very slant-eyed, but it'd be one thing if they were like loosely tied to like the Proud Boys or some of the paramilitary groups that were at January 6th, right?
right,
And again, if you were there just because you really felt like you needed to be there, and then not knowing what was going to happen,
right,
like you're by extension now roped up in that,
right,
and you may not even been one of the people that actually committed the crime of breaking into, you know, the Capitol building. But because simply by you being there, like you are now like forever associated with them.
right.
You might even later be like, I haven't seen any or read any articles. I know these people exist, But I would like to believe that there's some people out there that were like, "Yep, I went there, and it turns out I was wrong." You know,
Right.
like I would
I'm
like
sure
to
there
hear
probably
back
are.
from those people.
I mean,
You know,
there was. I mean, I've been hearing so many different estimations as to how many people I've heard anywhere from 2 million to tens of thousands. But either way, it was a ton of people.
got some
And
people.
if you're someone that is not really aware of what happened on January 6th as well, you need to understand that there was rioting, and that is not acceptable.
Mm,
But there was also a whole bunch of other people that were waved in by police officers that was taken on video. Some of these individuals went to court and were actually released because of they proved that, hey, that's me on video being waved in by a police officer. Because there's also there was multiple entryways that
mm,
were a part of the event, and so there was a area that had some rioting and some actual violence that you're seeing on the photos and the videos that are being heavily pushed.
mm.
But then there was also people that were just waved into other doors that had no idea what was going on, and you can literally see like people like my grandma's age being waved into to the Capitol, just not
Yes.
even sure what they were doing, and they're being charged with trespassing, and that's where we need to again always look at things with nuance, because things are not as black and white as they seem. And I think as Christians, we need to be able to have these conversations so that we can flush out um, what is true, what is false, and anything that we don't know, we just put it in the category of we don't know.
Mm.
But that's why, to put this all wrapped up with a bow, we need to be able to have these discussions. So, um, any closing thoughts on that, Zach?
Not on that, but just closing thoughts in general. I'd like to remind everybody out there to take a close look at what you're about to eat. It's not so important to know what it is, but it's critical to know what it was.
There we go. And Zach, how can people find you?
You can find me at Zach of All Music there on the Instagrams. I've got some new music coming out. I just released a song Friday, the 23rd of September. I've got a whole new album, 10 spanking new songs. Actually, two of them are cover tunes. But so 8 songs coming out, plus 2 covers on the 14th of October in the year of our Lord 2022.
Excellent. All right, guys, we'll keep up with Zach. Zach is doing an awesome thing by creating some culture of his own. So definitely support him in that. And if you want to support this show, go to forgeandanvil.locals.com. I did not say that at the top of the show. I should have, but forgeandanvil.locals.com. If you want to support the show, there is some exclusive content there. And if you would like to give some input on the show, I do check all the comments on locals.com. So forgeandanvil.locals.com. Thanks so much, guys, for listening. We have been the Forge and Anvil, and we are signing off.